Okay, well, everyone, welcome to the Seminole Avenue traffic calming meeting. This is March 28th, 2024. It's 5:30 p.m. and this is a virtual meeting only. So we're all meeting here at WebEx. The meeting will be recorded and posted to YouTube, and that way anyone will be able to view it after the fact if they wish. Before we dive in, just want to let everyone know, I'll pause for questions a couple of times throughout, but also feel free to use the chat function in WebEx. I've got that open, and we'll see if any questions come through there. But while we're paused, feel free to come off mute and ask away if you'd like. So to start out, what is traffic calming? We're just going to review the program in general. The Neighborhood Street Traffic Calming Program, that's NSTC, it focuses on residential streets. That's bold and italics, just because we want to make sure everyone is clear that it isn't something that we do on like big arterial roads or the large road collectors, anything like that. We are getting a little bit of background noise from someone, so if we could all make sure to mute ourselves, that would help the meeting go smoothly if we don't mind. We do focus on physical solutions only. Well, not only, but we focus on them that encourage lower speeds over significant lengths, and the primary focus of the traffic calming program is speed reduction. There are 3 E's of traffic calming. Those are education, enforcement, and engineering. Engineering is big, bold, and underlined here because that's really what NDOT is able to influence the most. We have a design that's been engineered by us to achieve the program's goals, and we're hoping that will be the biggest help. There's also education. That's kind of like this meeting we're having here, where we're talking to folks in the community about speeds and traffic safety. And then there's also enforcement, which is entirely within the realm of Metro Nashville Police Department. And while we'd like for them to be everywhere at once, making sure folks are driving the correct speed, they cannot hang out in every neighborhood at all times. So while we're grateful that they help enforce our traffic laws, we found that using other solutions as well can yield better results. To reiterate, this is a program focused primarily on safety. That's sort of why we're seeking to reduce speeds on our residential streets. And a good infographic to help sort of demonstrate why that's so important to us is showing on the slide now. Essentially, if a car is traveling at 25 miles an hour, the speed which most neighborhood streets are posted as the speed limit, if they were to hit a pedestrian, there's an 89% chance of survival. I can't say that is quite high enough, but certainly it's a pretty reasonable chance. Unfortunately, that chance declines pretty fast as the speed of the car that hits a pedestrian climbs. So that's where in the 35-mile-an-hour range, it goes down to like 2/3. And then if a car hits a person going 45 miles an hour, they only really have like a 1/3 chance of making it out alive. So that's why this program is taken very seriously, and we are so enthusiastic about giving you all a design that's going to help slow speeds. It's primarily just to make sure that nobody perishes on Nashville's roadways if we can avoid it. This is a really popular program. So when Seminole Avenue was selected, there were over 500 streets that had applied for traffic calming. Each one of those is represented by a purple line on that map over to the right. So we can see that they're pretty much all over the county, especially in the areas where most people are living. And in the summer of 2023, we were able to select 85 streets to pursue as projects. So we've been plenty busy, but we're really excited that we're able to get this much work out. So there's a few things that are like a good fit for the traffic calming program. We're going to talk about some of the tools and options we have in the next slides. But there are also a lot of things in the infrastructure realm that traffic calming as a program in NDOT doesn't have the ability to address. So sidewalks is something that comes up fairly often. Traffic calming is not able to build a sidewalk on the street, but luckily there's another program, the Sidewalks and Bikeways program, that does work on that. So this slide is up just to make sure that everyone is aware that for things that we're not going to be able to address with this project, Hub Nashville is a great place to request just about anything from Nashville, and that will go into their list of projects to consider. How did Seminole get selected out of that 500 street pool? Well, basically, once a street applies for traffic calming, we go out and collect data on that street. So what we do is we count how fast are people driving on average, and then how many people are driving on a street. Those are those two big chunks, the blue and red right there, vehicular speeds and volumes. And the reason those are weighted so heavily in that pie chart is because ultimately those two things are what really produce the risk of a person getting hit by a vehicle and how bad that accident might be. So we focus on how fast are people driving and how many people are driving that fast. That's not the whole story. So we also like to consider if there's been a pedestrian accident already. That's that 15% yellow slice of the pie. Certainly if someone's already been hit, we don't want to just ignore that fact in our selection process. So we consider that. And then there's also non-driver accommodations and trip destinations. The non-driver accommodations, that basically, do you have sidewalks or don't you? And if you don't, what we do is we add some points to that scoring formula to make sure that we account for the fact that there's really nowhere to walk and pedestrians will be in the street. And then that last 5% trip destinations, that's how close are you to a park or to a school. The reason we consider that is we know those two things produce pedestrian trips, and certainly we want to be extra careful in spots that we know people will be walking around. Some data about Seminole. It's the stretch from Craighead to Gladstone. I think that's the whole thing, if I'm not mistaken. But that's what was applied for. And the 85th percent speed was 35 miles an hour. That's not the highest we've seen in this program, but that makes a little bit of sense because the section itself is relatively short, so we don't expect people to have a lot of time to pick up a bunch of speed, but it is still reasonably high. And then the volume, 1,400 or so vehicles per day. That sounds like a lot, but it's actually on the lower end of our range. I'd say it's pretty typical for a street that we get through this program. One thing that stuck out to me is it is a really narrow street. So 20 feet wide is just about that bare minimum width of asphalt for two full-sized lanes. So that's something that we're going to consider in the design as well. And then finally, here is just a map. This is a screenshot of NDOT's traffic calming tracker, but highlighted in yellow there, you can see that's Seminole Avenue. And those purple lines are streets in the area who've applied. Green and blue, blue is completed projects, and then green are projects that we're working on, so in the process. So yeah, with that, do we have any questions on what we've covered so far? Next, I'm going to kind of zoom into the tools that we have at our disposal, but I want to make sure to pause and take any questions if anyone has them.
I don't have any.
All right, well, we can move right along. So most people who are familiar with the traffic calming program know that NDOT relies really heavily on speed cushions. These are basically the default tool that we start designing around for most streets. There are situations where they're not quite appropriate, but for the most part, this is sort of NDOT's favorite tool. And the reason for that is they're a physical solution to speeding. So unlike a lower speed limit or maybe a sign that suggests a person go slow, or different striping that may suggest vehicles go a different way, a speed cushion will actually like interrupt a person while they're driving too fast. If you're driving at a regular speed, say 25 mile an hour, 30 mile an hour, you'll feel it as you go over, but it's not going to be like an abrupt jolt. They really are designed to be not unpleasant while driving safely, but progressively more jarring as speeds climb. They're about 6 feet wide. The reason for that is to minimize the impact to emergency vehicles. So the next slide we have is speed tables. That's essentially just a giant speed cushion that stretches across the road. But with speed cushions, we leave little gaps in between them, and that way a larger vehicle like a fire truck or an ambulance, for instance, they can kind of straddle that cushion, not 100%, but doing it this way is not going to be, like an impediment to an emergency vehicle getting to where they need to be. And then finally, they come in a variety of lengths. So there are 7-foot cushions, 10.5 feet, and 14 feet. These are modular, so that's sort of why they're in those increments. Basically, there's 1.5 foot long devices that we slide in there. So a 7-foot cushion, that basically comes up and then comes right back down immediately. 10.5 and 14, those have those flat sections in the middle there to sort of stretch the cushion out, in the direction that cars are moving. And the reason we would go up in cushion length is if volumes were higher or like a target speed wasn't 20, 25, more in that 30 mile an hour range. So that's one design input that we can play around with. I sort of addressed speed tables already. These essentially, like I mentioned, are giant speed cushions that go all the way across the road. There are scenarios that we will use these. If a road is kind of like a weird width that doesn't quite work with an ideal speed cushion layout, we may lean on these. But we tend to avoid them just so that we make sure, we're not messing around with emergency vehicles if it can be avoided. I've mentioned that NDOT really prefers using these vertical measures because they believe that they work. They also verified that claim both with national research that's been conducted already, and then they even went ahead and did a study on Nashville installations of speed cushions. So the results we're seeing here are how much speed was reduced before and after the installation on a few projects around the city. So we can see the average speed went down from 31 miles an hour to 22, and then the 85th percent speed, that went down from 37 all the way to 25. So this is pretty consistent with the results that were expected, but we were really pleased to see that all this effort isn't going to waste. That they actually do have the intended effect of producing lower speeds on residential streets where they're installed. In areas that we can't do speed cushions, or perhaps at the beginning of a project where we might not have had speed cushions already, we can sometimes put out radar feedback signs. I think most people have seen one of these before, but essentially it's a speed limit sign with a solar panel, and an additional device that reads the speed that you're going and then reports it back to you. And if you're going fast, I think it'll turn red maybe and just sort of say, "Hey, don't don't go so fast." Like I alluded to earlier, these are great for providing information to drivers, but they don't really do anything to slow a driver down if they are speeding. They collect a lot of data, so that can be useful, especially to know if the signs work or not. And we did see an average reduction of 6 to 7 miles an hour, immediately after these were installed. The jury's still out a little bit on if they keep those speeds down long term. I think there's a bit of a suspicion that you can put one of these in and it'll work a little bit at the beginning, but once people get used to it, it may not be as effective. I'm not sure we've got a solid answer on that just yet. We can also do pavement narrowing. So that's in scenarios where if you have a lot of pavement, really wide street that feels nice and comfortable to, kind of get a little heavy on the gas with. Narrowing that with white edge lines to sort of take the perceived pavement width down a bit, make the road feel a little more claustrophobic. That can reduce speeds just with kind of that psychological effect. Similar to the signs, though, it doesn't do anything to like physically impede a speeding vehicle, but we do mix it in to our designs on roads where it feels appropriate. It also can kind of provide an added benefit of if you're walking along the road, you sort of know where you need to be to not be in the path of a vehicle. So it can add some pedestrian comfort as well, though not serving as like a real sidewalk. We can also do things called bulb outs or chicanes. A bulb out is an intersection treatment, and essentially it's sort of like the pavement narrowing, but at corners. The idea really is if you have a wide intersection, you're able to take turns pretty fast and maybe so fast that you don't have time to look for folks who might be crossing the road or other hazards. We do bulb outs in areas where we think we can shrink that pavement down, still provide enough of an intersection for people to use and navigate through with their vehicles, but not so large that you're able to take those turns really fast and in a way that's unsafe. And then another bonus you get from doing bulb outs is it shortens the distance that a pedestrian has to cross the road and be in danger of conflicting with cars. So we consider that on streets as well. Chicanes probably isn't going to be a good fit for Seminole because you need enough pavement to sort of zigzag back and forth as you go along the road. But when we can do those, we find that speeds are reduced just because vehicles are forced to do some maneuvering as they're traveling along rather than just a straight shot where you're able to speed up a bit more. And then finally, we have traffic circles. These are a good tool for intersections that are really large, so even larger than intersections we might do bulb outs in. There's only been a few in Nashville that we've felt are big enough to put one of these in and still reliably be able to make like a left turn around it with a larger vehicle such as a school bus. But we will do them from time to time, and they have the same effect as any of those other kind of devices that make a vehicle maneuver around it as a way to slow it down. Do we have any questions about the tools we talked about? We've got the concept that we've sort of got in mind for Seminole up now, and we can move on to that if we'd like, but I also want to make sure we can go back to any of the slides that we just covered. Okay, well, I can keep going. So this is sort of a rough concept of what we're thinking might work pretty well for Seminole Avenue. We see that you're connected to Craighead. That's obviously a very large, pretty high-speed road. But I suspect that some of the traffic y'all experience is due to the fact that you've got those railroad tracks there, and Seminole happens to be that kind of famous underpass of those tracks that let you access, either side of that railroad. It is pretty straight, so that made our life a little easier with the cushion placement. We don't like to do cushions on really sharp curves because we want you to be able to see them before you're on top of it. And then we do space these out pretty deliberately. So the sweet spot of cushion placement is somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 feet. The reason for that is because we want them to be close enough together that you don't have time to speed up back to a dangerous speed if one intends to. But we don't really see a lot of benefit in putting them much closer than 300 feet, just because you're spending more resources and disruption, but not really slowing cars down more than you otherwise would. So that's about how we arrived at this design. We also try to dodge things like driveways and intersections with other streets. So we've got a certain clearance from Dunn Avenue that we're seeking to hit, and then we also don't put these anywhere within 10 or 15 feet of a person's driveway, because we don't want to just plop this down and make someone have to go over it every day just to leave their yard, essentially. So that's all I've got on the design itself, unless anyone has questions about what we're proposing, what we're not proposing. You feel free to let me know. Okay. Well, that means we can move on to sort of the next steps in the program. This is a flow chart that says exactly how this project moves through time. As you can see, top left, it started with an application. So in order to get into the traffic calming program, you have to ask. The prioritization and selection, that's kind of what we covered with that colorful pie chart earlier on, where we analyze the data and collect it. And we're over at that red circle, the neighborhood meeting. So we've just sort of covered what the program is, what our concept design looks like, and we're going to also review some of the balloting information. But then the next step is the actual design. So we do a site visit. We'll produce more detailed construction plans. It'll look kind of like this, but just show down to the foot, like where exactly are these speed cushions going, how long are they, how many across the street, sort of all the details you need to actually go out and build the thing. And then after we do the design, we can go one of two ways. We can either schedule a second neighborhood meeting to look at the plans, sort of review some of the information we've covered tonight, collect more feedback if anyone has it. Or what we can do is we can post the plans online and then send everyone their ballot postcards. And what balloting consists of is essentially we send everyone on the street a letter, and it'll have a unique ID code. And then we ask everyone who wants to vote to either go online and submit their vote, yes or no, or call up NDOT and they'll help you do the same. After that ballot is either successful or not successful, it'll go into construction. If the ballot isn't successful, we're going to modify the design, take out the vertical measures, and try to do something. But we don't do the projects that have enough people that don't want them. The construction process is a pretty long one. It's currently in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 months from the end of the ballot to getting installed. And when I say that, I don't mean that the actual building of the project takes a long time. There's just a pretty long backlog of projects waiting to be built at the moment that y'all will be put into a queue for, essentially. So we hope we can get that time down. We'd like to really, experiment with new contractors and different things to sort of speed that process up. But at the moment, that 8 to 10 months is sort of a safe estimate of when y'all might be seeing your project installed after the ballot period. So we don't have to decide right now, but before the end of the meeting, we'll probably want to nail down, like, do we want to schedule a second meeting, or would we rather just sort of flesh the plans out, look at them online, and then vote. But we'll talk about the ballots and such first. So I mentioned the ballots. These are postcards. They look like the image in the top left corner. So it's just a little postcard with instructions. And then the really key piece of information is that unique ID code. So everyone who's supposed to vote will have a code that corresponds to them, and you'll enter that in the form that you enter yes or no. That's just to make sure that nobody's voting who's not supposed to. The period of voting will be open for 6 weeks. We think that's plenty of time. If you were on vacation when the mail showed up and didn't quite get to it, you have a bit of a buffer period to work with, but we don't want it to be, waiting like months and months before we're able to move forward. And there is a 66% threshold that determines a project is successful. So what that means is if 6 people vote, 4 of them would have to vote yes for it to move forward. That does feel a little high to some people, but despite that, we do see almost all of the traffic calming projects we ballot move forward. So it's a threshold that I think we're generally comfortable with. I mentioned that there are people who are supposed to vote and people who aren't. This eligibility is generally what we're looking at. So it's any property owner with a property line abutting the right of way in question. So even if your address is on Camden, for instance, but your backyard still touches Seminole, you'll be able to vote on the project. Vacant properties are ineligible. That's just because we know if no one's living there, then they're not, affected in the way that we're seeking to address. And then if there's owners of multiple properties, we'll send them one postcard to vote one time. We don't want you to get 10 votes just because you own 10 parcels along the right of way. And then finally, churches and schools get 1 vote each, but like businesses, for instance, do not. We're really focused on like the neighborhood portion of this, and that's why we're really seeking for the residential parts of the street to be making this decision. Any questions about the ballot or the ballot eligibility, sort of anything along those lines? All right. Well, I'm here for more questions. I will ask that as a group, we kind of consider, would we prefer to have a second meeting or move on to the ballot? So if anyone feels one way or the other, feel free to either put it in the chat or speak up on the phone. We're really happy to do either one. It probably goes without saying the second neighborhood meeting adds a little bit of time to the timeline. But only about a month, really. So it's in the grand scheme of things fairly negligible. But it is worth thinking about.
Yeah, I would vote for skipping a second meeting, just going straight to the ballot. Same
Sounds
time.
good. Yeah, that works just fine. We'll do that unless I hear differently, either now or later. This is my contact information, so if any questions or concerns come up, after the meeting, feel free to reach out. I will ask that you also copy the NDOT TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov just to keep them in the loop as well. But I'm happy to address anything that may come up after this evening. And then finally, thank you all for coming out. We're excited to get this project going, and we'll get our pencils sharpened and cook up a design for us to view online and vote. Yeah, and I guess with that, any final thoughts, comments, concerns? Okay, well, I will go ahead and end the meeting. Y'all have a wonderful night and enjoy this great weather we're having here.
Thanks, David.
Sure thing.